introducing people. Okay, so how many people saw my presentation yesterday? Never mind. Okay. I was going to say, well, you know, somebody else was here. It looked like there were new people or whatever, so I just redo the other one, but never mind.
Which one are we going to
closed networks. The top. Hi there. I'm Ira. Anyway, so basically, everybody saw my presentation yesterday, which was kind of more high-level stuff. And if you haven't figured out the way I come up with my presentations, a lot of them they're based on stories or they're based on rants. Sometimes they're based on both, because if I ever see something that really gets me like pissed off, I can say pissed off here, can I?
Yeah.
No, I was telling somebody, I once spoke in San Antonio, Texas, and I was giving this talk, what the Wizard of Oz says about information security. And so I reenact the Wizard of Oz with puppets. And then at some point in time, like, you know, the end of the movie, I'm kind of saying like, okay, so, you know, just summarizing the end very quickly. What happens is, you know, they're about to run, you know, fly off with a balloon, and all of a sudden Toto jumps out of the basket to chase a cat, which is how she got in trouble in the first place. Then the scarecrow with all his brains couldn't tie a good knot, and the balloon goes floating off. The wizard, who's like most security professionals, doesn't know how to use the tools he has, couldn't turn the balloon around, and therefore Dorothy was stuck, and then a big pink bubble comes floating down from the sky. And it's the good witch who says you can go home at the ruby red slippers would take you home anytime. I'd be really pissed that she sent me on a suicide mission and didn't tell me this in the first place. So anyway, then I was like, you know, so I gave this presentation in San Antonio, Texas, and then I was like sitting, and then so I was supposed to give it once in the morning and once in the afternoon, and we were going to lunch. I was, you know, and everybody seemed to love the presentation. I was talking to my hostess, who was like walking us to lunch, and I was like saying, so how do you think it went? She's like, well, some of the people were very upset with the language. I'm like, language? I was pretty good on this one. And she's like, I'm from New York, you know? It's like,
You're from Brooklyn!
Yeah, Brooklyn. I'm from New York. Go to hell, where's Wayne? But then I'm walking, she's like, well, you probably don't realize you said this. And I'm really sure you don't realize you said this, but you said, pissed off. And I was like, pissed off? I go, if my mother ever said she was pissed off at me, I think there's something wrong with her, why she was being so nice to me. It's like, I'm like sitting there and everybody's like, so anyway, it's like, that's San Antonio, Texas. I guess, okay, so I'm somewhere between Chicago and San Antonio, and I have to figure out where that line is. So that in mind, so one day I was watching the news, and then it comes out and they're talking about all the naval ships that kind of got, that were crashing in the Pacific and everything. And somebody comes up, it's like, so they were saying, were these naval ships hacked or something? And that was like a big question. Is somebody hacking naval vessels? And they have these talking head admirals that come on. It's like, oh no, the naval vessels can't be hacked because they're all on closed networks. I'm like, are you out of your mind? So I started going on a rant, like, just because it's a closed network, especially a naval vessel with all the Navy, anybody here in the Navy? Anyway, okay, good. So anyway, all the Navy people on those ships, I mean, and they can be hacked. And I was like sitting there like, God, I was like in there. And then I was like talking, because I've been hacking closed networks for quite a while now. And so what happened was I kind of came up with a rant, and there's stories involved and everything like that. So I should probably go on with the presentation since I just wasted 5 minutes of 45. So anyway, so what happened was I was talking, and as I mentioned, I was watching the news, and everybody said, oh, that we can't hack a naval vessel because the naval vessels are all on closed networks and everything like that. And then if you know me, it was like, well, hold my beer, but if you really know me, I don't drink beer. I drink Diet Mountain Dew. So I'm like, that's it, hold my Diet Mountain Dew, which is why there's all those Diet Mountain Dews out there that you all bastards were drinking. that there's none left for me. And John's like, well, we got to send somebody out. It's like, gee, John, those are the first things to go here. So anyway, they've got to hold my diet Mountain Dew. Now, here's why. Because the fact is, it's like ignorance is dangerous. It isn't bliss. Especially when you're talking about like all these things. It's like, well, it's on a closed network. And the problem is, it's like if you're sitting there saying, well, we put it on a closed network, so therefore we don't have to worry about it, that's when you have the biggest problems. That's when you have the biggest mistakes. I mean, you got assholes like Snowden. I'm sorry, actually, I was very kind to him just then. But you got somebody like Snowden there. You got like Manning and all these other people who are all on closed networks, yet were able to get to steal lots of data and stuff like that. Now, here's the problem, and you got to consider this. If you can steal something, you can put something back in. If you have half a brain. And people have to consider that people, even if they're just stealing things, they can put stuff in as well. You have to be concerned about that. But if people are out there thinking just because the networks are closed, there's no perceived risk, that's a big, big problem. And again, what people have to realize, if somebody says it's valuable enough to close, you have to understand that it's valuable enough for bad people to say, well, it's a closed network. It's probably valuable, we got to go after it. And frankly, people go after it just because it's closed sometimes, because at least for me, it's more of a challenge, so let's go after those things. But generally, if you think it's so valuable that you have to close it off, it's valuable enough that people are going to try to screw it over. So let's talk about something else. So I don't know how many people saw this presentation, but back in 2008, I gave an RSA presentation called How to Take Down the Power Grid. And what happened was I gave a case study where I essentially screwed over like a company that was responsible for the power grid. And what happened was, and this is actually a true story, so I gave it, and some guy from Network World was in the audience, and he wrote it up. And then what happened was, like, it got written up, and then I got a call from the special agents from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission said, oh yeah, we heard about your presentation. We'd like to come by and talk to you and stuff. I'm like, okay. And then there was like another guy. Then I got a call from the Edison Electric Institute, which is the lobbying group for the nuclear which is for the nuclear like power generation companies. And I'm like talking to the people, and we're like saying, oh yeah, we'd like to, we're really interested in your research and love to talk to you sometime. Maybe invite you in, pay you to do a talk. It's not like we're trying to discredit you or anything. I'm like, oh, now I know why you called, because you are trying to discredit me. So then what happened was, so I get that, then a little while later, so I talked to like the person who called from the NRC and sat him down, and he's like, oh, well, just trying to learn, and they were asking questions, and I just basically kind of rehashed the presentation and didn't give them anything more. Then what happened was, I got a call from somebody who was an analyst at Pacific Northwest Labs. Pacific Northwest Labs is one of those research agencies near Seattle-ish area, I guess. And they called in, there was an analyst, he's like, yeah, my boss just wants to find out some questions, like who your customer was and stuff like that. I go, I don't know who the hell you are, I'm not telling you anyway. It's like, oh, okay, well, my boss is really one. I go, I couldn't care less. So then, a couple of days later, I get a call from some guy who claims to be the director of security for Pacific Northwest Labs, and he goes on and talks to me. It's like, well, yeah, I was the assistant director of the FBI and all that. Really like to find out who you was. I'm like, I don't care who you are. I don't even know. You're a voice on the phone. I don't care. So anyway, I didn't tell him that. Then like 3 weeks later, I get a call from somebody who claims to be, and he's like, he calls me up. It's like, yeah, I'm the director of security from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I'd love to talk to you about this. I go, I'm kind of busy right now. So anyway, I hang up on him. I go, well, maybe if you call back in a couple days. So he calls me back in a couple days. Then he's like, well, I'd really love to know this, and I want to know who your customer. I go, I'm not telling you. I've got like non-disclosure agreements with him. It's like, well, there might be congressional hearings. I go, gee, that would be terrible. I'll get more free publicity. I don't know if I really want a congressional hearing. So anyway, it's like, I'm not telling you anything. It's like, well, and then then about a month goes by, and then 2 FBI agents show up unannounced at my house. And I'm thinking, and this is like one thing, this is the truth, I usually work with law enforcement and everything. Here's a big clue. If law enforcement ever wants to talk to you, do not talk to them. Tell them to go to hell. Literally. But I decided I invited them in though, because I was kind of pissed. And I wasn't going to tell him anything, but I had this nice big husky. Now, my husky is like, most huskies are supposed to be 50 pounds. He was 130 pounds. And, he looked like a wolf. So anyway, they would sit down. The thing is, he's the stupidest dog you could ever imagine. But the worst part is he doesn't lick you. So he would, they were sitting down, and usually when guests come, I put my dog in the crate. But, for these people, I wasn't going to put my dog in the crate. These are like a bunch of FBI agents, and he was shedding all over their suits. So that was So then, my dog, he's the type that if I walk in the house, he's literally like a bearskin rug. He won't move because he knows he's not going to be fed till it's time to be fed. But if a stranger comes in, all of a sudden he's really excited because he's like, they might feed me. So, and then it's like I told you, he doesn't lick people, but what he does is he looks at them, so they're sitting there trying to talk to me with his muzzle right in their face. And it's like, when they're sitting down, his muzzle was in there, and it's like a big wolf picture. So it was like, I'm like, oh, just ignore him. And so they're like, well, we'd like to talk. I go, I'm not talking to you about that. I want to talk to you about the time I called you up and needed help, and they're there for this. And they're like, well, we're here about this. I go, what happened? I go, aren't you guys supposed to be, you guys were probably doing child pornography till you came here. It's like, well, I can't talk about what we were working on. I go, so in other words, you're wasting your time talking to me instead of investigating child pornography. Well, we got a message from somebody, and I'm like, anyway, I go, they're like, well, we really want to know who the customer, I go, I'm not telling you, because honestly, if I told them who the customer was, they could have claimed it actually is a violation of federal law to give away vulnerabilities of nuclear reactors. And I know what they were trying to do, so that's why I was not talking to them. I just want to bother the hell out of them for driving all the way over unannounced, because it's so annoying. So anyway, but this kind of went on. Then about a week or two later, I got a call from Brian Krebs. And most of the time, Brian Krebs calls you, really not a good thing. But for me, it's cool, because Brian and I are friends. And Brian's like, Ira, I have to talk to you, because I keep pressing the wrong button. Anyway, so Brian called me up. He's like, Ira, I got to talk to you. The people from the NRC called me up, and they came and basically wanted to know and wanted to give me a presentation, in their words, why your presentation was complete bullshit. And he goes, when they told me that, I know it's got to be true. So he wanted to know what I basically was talking about, because no way else was paid. He's like, these people are going around trying to discredit you, and that means it's really true. So anyway, what happened was, I told Brian pretty much everything. He's like, okay, I might use that. And then a month later, Brian writes a story, Tennessee Valley Authority, power plants vulnerable to cyber attacks, basically describing exactly how I did compromise the theoretical system. It wasn't the Tennessee Valley Authority, which is even more scary that there were multiple nuclear companies around like that. But where the business networks and the control systems are on the same network. That was the fundamental vulnerability, where basically what we did was, and I think I'll give the case study later, but it's the same type of attack I used that the Government Accounting Office did a study that they made public on exactly how they compromised the Tennessee Valley Authority, which is the power company for Tennessee and a few other states around there. So that just gives you background. So in general, though, compromising closed networks, there's almost an infinite number of ways to compromise closed networks. Is it harder? It's like, yeah, it's a little bit more involved than just sitting there on the internet and hacking a company. But when you start to think about it and you start to figure out what are the likely attack vectors, there are known attack vectors for closed networks. And you don't want to have people do this. So again, what are they? Different scenarios closed. There's different access points that are uncontrolled, diagnostic equipment, insider abuse, compromised developers, etc. Now let's talk about targeting closed networks. And there's been a whole bunch of different types of things. So a little while ago, the CERT put out the CERT advisory, it's like this year, it's 74A. Basically, they claim Russia was targeting industrial control systems through multi-stage campaigns, which again was primarily closed networks. So that's the type of stuff they were doing, primarily through phishing campaigns, air gap systems, and so on. There are people who do watering hole attacks, and what a watering hole attack, for those people who don't know, is that you kind of don't think you can compromise the base system, but you know that people who use that system might go to somewhere else. So I'll give you an NSA example. Let's say Russia wants to compromise employees at NSA. The NSA credit union is Tower Federal Credit Union, and if they wanted to hack the homes and see if people steal information from NSA, which can't remember the name of the guys who were just arrested. There were like a couple people who took data home, actually from the old C4 systems and so on that Jeff talked about earlier, where they basically downloaded like NSA hacking tools onto a USB drive and took it home with them and put it on their home computer. So, you might go ahead and say, maybe there's lots of other NSA employees that do that, so they can't hack those people, but they might hack the Tower Federal Credit Union website, put malware on that website, and then when NSA employees or whoever's associated with NSA goes to that site, downloads the malware onto their systems, and they could go through their systems and start looking for data, even if it's just for a bunch of things. But that's one way into a closed network. Phishing is obviously one thing, because even people think, oh, well, phishing, it's a closed network, you can't get in. Again, don't count on it. Like I said, the nuclear reactor, the power company I work, like the power grid systems, their business systems and control systems were overlapping, but they try to steal credentials and stuff like that. There's also open source information that you can start with. There's a whole bunch of information on the design of power grids and a whole bunch of other closed networks, naval vessels and things like that, because all these Navy systems, everybody's like, oh, they must be secret and stuff. They put out for bids, they put out for maintenance contracts. You can get a good idea of what the internal systems of a ship look like from a lot of different sources. And even if like people accidentally put things up, you could just Google it and you'd be surprised what you find. So, like I mentioned before, closed networks usually aren't closed. There's a bunch of different ways. They might have started out closed, but over time, because here's a general thing of what happens. You have a network that's closed, and then somebody says, well, we have a closed network, and then, it's a closed system, so since it's a closed system, we could put email on there, and we'll let people email within the company. Then they say, okay, well, we have email on there. And then all of a sudden they say, well, some of these people need access to the internet. And it's like, so they want to send external email. So what they do is then they put an external connection on there so people can send out email, but they don't realize that the people using email are on supposedly access to a closed system, and they accidentally connect systems to the internet that they didn't realize were closed and are now connected to the internet. So you got that. They don't want to expense multiple networks. So previously they had like control systems, and then they put on the email systems, and then they put on the file servers and a whole bunch of other stuff. Because first they have multiple systems, but then they're so expensive to maintain. We don't want to have two PCs on a desktop. We just want to have one. So then they start thinking they could get around that, and they put limited connections, and the limited connections aren't as limited, and they'll put bridges from one network to another. And I'm not even talking about the wireless networks, the rogue IT. There are modems out there, and there are still modems out there. Then you have subcontractors that connect in and log into the corporate networks and so on to perform maintenance and other functions, that all these networks just open up before anybody knows what's going on. So once in, you got systems that are frequently not patched. You got things like WannaCry would happen, NotPetya. You had all those hospital systems, just as an example. They're like, well, don't worry, the operating rooms are on closed networks. It's like, guess what? They weren't on closed networks. They were taken down, and there was critical data all over the place. There's insecure configurations, the outdated systems, like again, NotPetya hit a whole bunch of systems like Windows 95 software that everybody said, well, they're not patched, we can't patch them. Microsoft doesn't support it, but we're still using those systems. So anyway, that's another way. So here's an example of how people might hack closed networks. This is how China, for example, would go ahead and establish connections on systems and stuff like that to steal information. So what they do is, and when you have APT type organizations like China, like Russia, NSA would never do anything like that, so of course we won't. But normally what happens is you have three teams of people. You have a collection management team, you have a breach team, and a collection team. The collection management team essentially establishes the tasking for everybody else, saying, so they'll work with the National Intelligence Authority, say, we need data on this power grid or whatever else. And what's going to happen is they then say, okay, we need to target that type of network, we need to target that company, now we need to get a foot in the door in the company. And they then send that tasking to the breach team. And the breach team is supposed to establish and maintain connectivity to the targeted network. So the way the breach team functions is they'll figure out how to target employees, and this is kind of saying an awful lot. Does the laser work on this thing? It doesn't work well. But anyway, the breach team, they'll do things like, there was an article the other day, and it was like one of those, so I'm really trying not to curse here, but there was one of those no crap Sherlock moments, like where they said, China uses LinkedIn for espionage, like, I'm sorry, like, you know, no crap Sherlock, you know, that China's using that, but China will use like that for their breach teams, because the breach teams will go ahead and search people inside the company, they'll figure out who's there, they might go ahead, for example, and like one way I got in, and I'll probably talk about this later, but you have sometimes like conferences that are going out. So for example, China saw that there was a conference for defense contractors, or that defense contractors would attend in all likelihood. So they went ahead and they created these malware-laden messages that basically said, here is the agenda for this conference you're likely to attend, and they would send it out, and they would start sending malware, and they would find LinkedIn and other connections. So anyway, the employee, they got on the targeted employee systems, steal their credentials, establish a foothold on the system with possibly malware or whatever. Then they started going ahead and compromise from that system. They compromise servers throughout the company. And what they do is they start what they call staging servers, and those are servers where they're going to launch attacks from. And then they have what referred to as exfiltration servers. Those exfiltration servers are used to store data for sending out later. And the reason why you want to store data for sending out later, and on different servers than the staging servers are, if somebody actually compromises the staging servers, you don't want to let them know what's already been stolen. You also don't want to send out what's already been stolen, because if you see lots of data going out, so for example, the target hacker, he didn't just like get, oh, here's a credit card, send it to me, send it to me. The target hacker took all the credit cards, put it on internal target systems, and then sent it out all at once. Because otherwise, if you see a lot of data go out to strange addresses, it's more likely to be seen, and they just once and send it out in mass, like what looks like potentially a video connection or something. But anyway, so you have the staging servers and exfiltration servers, and then that information is passed on to the collection team. Then the breach team goes away, they don't care about the employee, and then the collection team starts using the staging servers to launch attacks and find data. Once they find the data, they send it to the exfiltration servers, and then from the exfiltration servers, they exfiltrate it in mass to data receivers around the internet. And then from that point, it's funneled back to China in one way or another, or wherever it's going. Here's the power grid example. Here's how to take over the power grid. So what happened was, in the test I was given, we basically, the scenario was, they called me up and said, we have a contract to, like, this power grid company says we can't be hacked. And I'm like, really? Hold my diet, Mountain Dew. And so they called me in and they're like, okay, so I'm like, what information do we have? It's like, well, we have the name of the company. I go, well, do we have any information about the employees? They say, well, we have a user group list of the users who use the control system software, because they have user groups. I'm like, okay. So we had the email list. We took out the people who worked at thatcompany.com. And then from thatcompany.com, that was the user group list. Then set up a web server to essentially hr-company.com. And then when the company was going through a merger acquisition type of thing, so what I did was craft a phishing message that basically said, as part of the merger, we're going to go ahead and we're going to have a worst of both worlds benefits package. And what's going to happen is, so if company 1 has 2 weeks a year off and company 2 has 3 weeks a year off, we all get 2 weeks a year off, and so on. So, and I asked them, I'm like, we literally can't do anything? They're like, we can do anything because the company says they can't be breached. I'm like, anything? They're like, anything. So I created that message, which I know would piss people off if they ever received the message. So what then happened was I sent out the inflammatory message to the people on the mailing list. People on the mailing list sent over the web request. Malware was sent back to their system, and we had malware targeted for the system itself because we knew the type of control software was, what the vulnerabilities were. The malware went there, and then what happened was that gave system control back. Now, the funny part of this whole thing, besides the bizarre fact how easy this was, there was something close to 100,000% hit rate. Because the message was sent out to essentially 15 people who were on the user group list, and they got this email message, and they were so incensed by it that they forwarded to all their friends. And we got the whole test had to be shut down within 2 hours because there were more than 1,000 hits. So that was a bad thing. Anyway, so that's what happened. Because what happened was we sent back, like the web server sent like a 404 error, the malware, and gave them a 404 type of screen type of stuff. Anyway, the general note, that case study that I described happened in 2008. Like I mentioned, Brian Krebs reported in the Tennessee Valley Authority 2 months later. Siobhan Gorman, who she was a reporter for the Wall Street Journal at the time, she reported that Russia and China were hacking the US power grid, which was of course a closed network, in 2009. Wired then reported that power grid was being hacked in September of 2006, September 2017, like it was a brand new thing that never happened before. And then a new round of stories like another new revolutionary attack. 2017 is just the start. It's like, oh no, 2008 was just the start. But anyway, this new stories happened in 2018. New rounds of stories that were going to happen in another 6 months. We already heard the discussions that Russia hacked the Ukraine power grid in 2017 and so on. And there's all these things of closed networks being hacked. You know, and anybody who says, well, it's a closed network, it can't be hacked, is really not paying attention, which frankly is a whole industry. So anyway, uncontrolled access points as far as first ways in. Because too many people, and these are the easy ways in, assuming the network has been closed and is really closed. First type of uncontrolled you have closed networks, they frequently have access points. So, for example, if you have like the power grid itself, and even if you assume the power grid is completely closed, you have maintenance workers who get laptops. They then take the laptops, climb up the power poles, and plug the laptops into the grid to do diagnostics and a whole bunch of other stuff. Because even if you have a closed network, you have all this diagnostic equipment that people have to be able to plug in all over the place, whether it's distribution terminals, whether it's generation terminals, whether it's even like the smart grid, everybody's home is theoretically attached to it, and so on. You have critical infrastructure, air traffic control system, radar. I don't know how many people, I keep telling the story about this. How many people heard what happened at Worcester Airport? So Worcester Airport, and this is like 1997, I think. Some teenager in 1997 just had a war dialer in Worcester, some Worcester, Massachusetts teenager had a war dialer. Just war dialer his whole telephone exchange. He happens to get into modems that were connected to Worcester Airport that attached to the radar systems, the transmitters and stuff like that. And this kid took down the transmitter from the control tower. So all of a sudden they had to shut down the airport because a teenager did that in 1997, war dialing that. How many people remember the movie War Games? Came out in 1983 and still happened. So anyway, that's the type of stuff that 14 years later, somebody got in the same way. Water control systems, again, telecom systems, whatever. Then there was the Marucci Incident. A lot of people heard about this, but don't know it's the Marucci Incident. Marucci Incident, what happened was this guy, Vivek Baden, he worked for a contractor, and this is in Australia. He was fired under bad circumstances and was pissed off, so he stole some equipment and drove around the area where this stuff was, found access points for the sewage control systems, and dumped a whole bunch, like hundreds of thousands of gallons of sewage throughout the Australian region where he was working at. Then there's diagnostic equipment. Think about it this way, even if you have a naval vessel, and this is actually like diagnostic equipment on a naval vessel, you wheel these carts around and you plug these things in. You see them on planes and everything. And these are computers. They can be a PC, they can be USB drives, but essentially, or special purpose, you just plug it in and run diagnostics. If you plug something in, you could put malware on. It's not just limited to reading stuff, because these things are developed assuming only trustworthy people are going to plug in trustworthy systems. And they have these systems just lying all over diagnostic labs. I have done penetration tests on power grid companies, on naval contracting facilities, and they just have this equipment lying around that anybody can walk in, and they think it's a dumb piece of hardware, and they don't protect it like it can be potentially used to insert malware. It's a worldwide system. When you look at, for example, the Navy goes to ports all over the world, and guess what? Some of the ports don't have the most savory characters. And so you go to like large naval ports where you have, like an aircraft carrier goes in, that's 5,000 people right there. You have hundreds of thousands of people assigned to a potential naval port who are maintenance workers, ship workers, they have to load food onto the ships and all that sort of stuff, load medical equipment and everything. And thousands of people have access to that facility. And not everyone's cleared, and you can't tell me every piece of little equipment is protected that's not going to have something go on. So that's a critical issue. Some hacks do require detailed research. When you start looking at things, I'm going to get a little bit more into Stuxnet later, because Stuxnet is the iconic case of breaking into closed networks. But basically, it might require hacking of the contractors, the developers. How many people remember the Rsa Compromise, where Rsa was compromised, like 6 years ago or so now? What happened was somebody broke into China. China basically sent a phishing message to an HR employee at RSA. The thing contained a spreadsheet that basically exploited a slightly outdated version of Windows. They went ahead, the HR employee found they found the message in the spam folder, said, oh, I should have got that. They opened up a spreadsheet. The spreadsheet loaded malware on the network, like the example I gave before, which once China was in, they got in, and they did it really quick. RSA was pretty good. They detected the incident really, really quickly, but China pretty much got into RSA, went over, downloaded all the software for the secure ID tokens within 2 hours, and was out. Now, people at RSA are really mad, but to their credit, they tried to do the right thing, but still, within 2 hours, China was able to get the information out quickly, and then once they had that information, they started attacking Lockheed Martin and other defense contractors because they were trying to steal other stuff. They were trying to brute force the secure ID tokens and get in, and luckily RSA let people know so that they were able to detect that type of attack and stop it. Well, at least we know one case where they stopped it. We don't know all of them. So anyway, you might get documents available from maintenance personnel. They'll try to find this information out and do a lot of research. Again, Stuxnet required a lot of research, and that was another case. There's also outright hacking of developers. It's like, well, these are defense contractors. Of course they're secure. Don't think they're secure. Naval vessels, type of stuff. I mean, defense contractors are hacked regularly. I don't know why. Until I started researching this presentation, I never heard of this guy, Sue Bin. Frankly, from an intelligence perspective, they are my adversary, not my enemy. You got to admire incredible success. This guy, Sue Bin, was probably one of the most successful espionage efforts ever. And what this guy did from 2008 to 2014, they downloaded 50 terabytes of information from defense contractors because he managed a team of hackers. And include details of onboard computer systems of naval vessels, everything else. I'm going over. If you all want to leave, you can leave, by the way. But then, BAE Systems, which is another large defense contractor, they were hacked in 2009. Lockheed Martin was hacked in 2011, even though they stopped the RSA attack, they were hacked otherwise. There was an Australian contractor. This one I got the most detail regarding what was stolen, but 30 gigabytes of data was stolen, including F-35 data, C-130, P-8 data. P-8 is like submarine hunter type of things, if I'm not mistaken. you got a whole bunch of stuff there. And why, you're saying, why would an Australian contractor have F-35 stuff? Well, we started selling the F-35 airplane to other people or marketing it to other people, so these people know how to maintain it for their local governments and help us maintain it when they land there. But either way, if all these things are being hacked, you have to assume that not only can they hack it and steal information out, again, they could put information in, and that's one of the more critical issues. Compromise of the supply chain. This is where, going back, and of course, Jeff would have never been part of this, but the Equation Group, which is essentially thought to be C4 and other sorts of stuff like that, the Equation Group, one of the things they were accused of was compromising the supply chain. This is dating back to like early. They were accused of compromising supply chain, like where equipment was being sent from the manufacturer to like foreign government agencies or whatever, or foreign companies, and they got in there, they put malware on chipsets or whatever else was reported, and then these people thought they got nice, new, fresh, clean equipment. It got there, it was infected, and that Equation Group people were brilliant. There were the reports of the Equation Group, once it came out, that even if you knew your system was infected by the Equation Group, you couldn't even find the software to remove it. That's a really good hack. But anyway, they compromised the supply chain, were able to go ahead and infect systems that even if they knew it, they couldn't even get rid of them. China was accused of doing similar things, Stuxnet again, which was, you know, theoretically the Israelis and the US, but that's of course not right because we would never do stuff like that. Stuxnet delivered to be a compromise, well, likely a compromise of the supply chain as well, even though it was reported USB drives, supply chain is really the more likely thing. And it can either be for the initial delivery of a big system, but you also got to remember things like, let's talk about a naval vessel system again, like the Aegis anti-missile system or whatever. Those systems get periodic updates because we can always make them better. We always need more software. And those get updated, they get fed, there might be bugs found in the software, and the contractors fix the bugs, they enhance the software or whatever it is, and then they ship out new versions and update it via USB drives or whatever else. And that can also be infected. Even if you don't get it the first time, you can follow up and infect the updates. Then we have lovely people like that asshole Snowden, and then those people are also the type of people who take stuff out. You can get insiders at the developing organizations. You know, I was talking to the kids about how you recruit spies. It's really easy. Well, I shouldn't say it's easy to recruit spies, but if you do your work, you can find somebody inside a company who has financial troubles, medical issues, or whatever, or just gets drunk too often, and find those people, compromise them, and they could be at developers. It's not just even the people on the ship. You're compromising dozens, hundreds, thousands of developers potentially. The people in shipyards, people in repair facilities, a whole bunch of other people. Again, they could either plant time bombs in there, they could plant, you know, things that steal information or whatever. But again, anybody who can get access can put information on there. You also have black bag operations, which is another way to get in. Black bag operations, on most people, like a traditional spy, their job is to find people with access to information and get them to give it to them or get them to do something on their behalf. They try to keep clean hands themselves. However, sometimes if there's a high-risk situation where you can't trust an insider, where you have a very short window and you need critical expertise, you're going to get somebody to do a black bag operation, which means they're going to have enough information to be able to go in a surgical attack, get to the systems they need to, plant malware, and get out. That's kind of like the Mission Impossible type of stuff you see in the movie. I've done simulated some of that. It's not as James Bondy as you want, or you would like to think, but it's possible. Usually it's a last resort in the real world, not just in pen tests. You know, I kind of do it because it's fun and stuff. In the real world, it's the last thing you want to do because you don't want to have your own people on site. You'd rather have their people who you compromised on site to ruin it because it's less risk if they get caught. Then there's also making closed networks open, because a lot of times you have one network that's closed with all the wiring and everything like that. Then you have another network that's open. And on naval vessels, for example, they have the internet access for morale purposes, just as an example. They have satellite connections when they're not in like radio silence mode, and so the people can access the internet, they can email their family and do a whole bunch of other stuff. Now the thing is, you have two sets of wires throughout a naval vessel and stuff. And it's not just a naval vessel, but any sort of closed network, because if it's valuable enough to be closed, they will have two separate networks. All it takes, though, to connect the networks is a single patch cable if you can put the equipment in. And sometimes, it's not like, so for example, if you have the router of the closed network and the router of the open network, all you need is one cable to patch together. You can also go ahead, because on some penetration tests that I've done where there were closed networks, what we've done is we basically physically got inside the organization, and then once we were in there, we took we had a, what do you call it? A cell phone with, and we plugged the cell phone with an internet connection in to the router of the closed network, and then we were able to connect with the cell phone back and forth and like get on the network and steal information from the routers or whatever access we can get from there. So anyway, I'm kind of not giving you the real details, but think of what that could mean. Anyway, you can attach the routers to the network, like I mentioned, more permanent, like an example, the Marucci Incident, where the guy just wandered around with different types of control equipment and looked for rogue Wi-Fi. And a lot of people, the tools that look for rogue Wi-Fi can be used by bad guys to find your Wi-Fi and attach their stuff to, and that happens as well. And modems still do exist, despite the fact that most people don't think they're readily available. Let's talk about Stuxnet a little bit. Did anybody, what was the name of the movie that was there? Anybody remember the name of the Stuxnet movie? It was like a documentary type of thing. I forgot. They interviewed Richard Clark and a bunch of other people. Never mind. Anyway, okay, so what happened with Stuxnet, there was the Iranian facility, and they wanted to set the Iranian nuclear program back. The way to do that was they were trying to enrich uranium, which requires centrifuges to kind of get the uranium packed, more dense and whatever the case is. And so what happens is they need these advanced, they have systems, and they put all this underground, like the Iranians had an underground facility under a mountain where they were enriching uranium, and they had this equipment that did that. However, the Iranians had one of their defense contractors who was developing software for that underground facility and would periodically take their software and upload it and improve it and enhance the underground software. And so what they did was, now the thought was initially that people dropped USB drives where these Iranian scientists would pick it up, and then they loaded in the defense in the facility where the contractors were working, and then once they had that inside the defense contractor facility, then when software was updated and enhanced, it got delivered into the underground facility. So that was one thing. What they think now happened was, when the movie came out by that point, they figured that it was more likely that the Equation Group or similar people basically intercepted the equipment going to that Iranian manufacturer, installed the malware, and that's how it would get installed. Now, supposedly, the Stuxnet software was initially really successful. Then they're like, wow, this is great. Now let's provide some more enhancements, and it became more and more successful. They had a regular chain to update the software. And they were getting, and now they didn't care about information getting out per se, they just wanted to ruin the Iranian processing facility. And so, but at one point, somewhere, the software got out because they were told, I'm just saying what was reported, the people at NSA wanted to, or no, sorry, not the NSA people, but people like the Israelis, well, not the Israeli people, but anyway, people who wanted to destroy Iran's facility basically were really well disciplined, and at some point they got more and more undisciplined as they were told to be more active, and that led to the ability for the software to escape. So it escaped from the defense contractor and went out into the real world. And that's where people discovered Stuxnet, otherwise it was theoretically operating for a long period of time. Anyway, malware worked autonomously, able to consistently upgrade, mentioned that. So, can you hack a naval vessel? Yes, you can hack a naval vessel. It might be a little bit difficult, but it's not impossible. A Stuxnet-like strategy, because I'm just hypothesizing how you would get software, but a Stuxnet-like type of stuff, where you figure out who's designing the system for the navigational equipment, which is what apparently failed for what caused the naval vessels to crash. You kind of know that those systems get upgraded. You figure out where the software is being developed, where the hardware is being developed, and potentially go ahead and install malware into the incident, where you can put in some, what do you call it? Sorry, it's been a long day. I haven't had much sleep in the last week, but I'll figure it out. Time bombs, that's it. You can put time bombs in there, you determine the architecture through a variety of software, what's the likely attack vectors once you know the architecture, plant the malware through the supply chain, maintenance or hacking, place taps inside or sabotage. Again, there's a bunch of different ways once you know the architecture to figure out where I can compromise that. Disclaimer, of course, nobody would ever do this sort of stuff because naval vessels are closed networks and nobody could ever hack a closed network. So this is all just a theoretical conversation, of course, but we'll probably have more FBI agents show up at my house. But the thing is, it's more complicated. I know I'm making it sound simple in a 45-minute presentation. And if anybody said you're going to regularly get malware in an underground Iranian facility, they would have thought you were crazy, wouldn't they? It's like, nobody can hack, that's Iran. It's like, no, they pretty much did it really well. So to my terrorist followers, there's not enough. Oh, I should say that the CBS News reported that Al-Qaeda in Indonesia was using my presentation from RSA as a training program. I'm like, that's kind of cool. It's really stupid because I didn't give enough to make it really work. But anyway, if that's what they're doing, I mean, it's good to know that they're that stupid. So anyway, now we're really lucky. Terrorists are kind of dumb. Anyway, but to my terrorist followers, not enough to launch the attack. Hacking open networks can use similar techniques. You know, the type of techniques I meant, really the only difference between hacking an open network and a closed network is just figuring out what's the way in. It's not that difficult. So keep that in mind. Stopping these things, because again, as I told the kids earlier today, I'm a security professional. I'm not just supposed to tell you how to break in, I'm supposed to tell you how to fix it. The thing is, you got to understand that first it can be done. And when you think it can be done, what you've got to realize is when you have a closed network, you've got to have a good security study and determine what are the vulnerabilities. And much like it's an open network, it's the same type of process. What vulnerabilities are going to get people in? How can I address for the insider threat? Yes, maybe it's a good idea on internal networks to have encrypted traffic and have token-based authentication and have software tokens for, or have software and communication equipment that doesn't allow for, well, we're going to encrypt communication from system to system because we're not going to just trust that a closed network means nobody could get on it. You should be able to have the same type of, is anybody still using it? We're still using Kerberos, right? Kerberos is a foundation for a lot of stuff. But having Kerberos type of activity, I'm just using that as a sample, to encrypt traffic from valid system to valid system, we kind of shut out a lot. Supply chain security, you've got to really look at supply chain security. Even if you're the average company, I talked a little bit about when Dell computer, HP, IBM, Lenovo computers, all those computer brands, because they got a bunch of bad capacitors that made it into the supply chain. So it's not just a national, well, I guess technically it could be a critical national security issue, but you got to make sure you secure your supply chain and make sure you get equipment from good sources who have good sources that they get their equipment from. And that's critical. Detection also has to be constant. Too many people, and here, most security programs fail because they're not security programs, they're just protection programs. I did back in 1990-ish, I did studies for the Pentagon on defensive information warfare. And way back then, we had some smart assistant secretary of defense going, here's the thing, protection will always fail, that's a given. That's why detection and reaction have to be as much a part of a security strategy as just generic protection. You have to make sure that you put detection and reaction capability even on closed networks. And I can't understate that enough. Every protection system will fail at some point in time. You got to make sure you detect whenever they do fail, whether the network is closed or not. There should be detection equipment all over the power grid. There should be detection equipment all over every ICS that's out there. Because if they're that critical that they're really industrial control systems and valuable to the continued operations, you got to detect when those security protocols fail. Wrong button. Anyways, a big takeaway, it can be done, it has been done, it will be done, and saying that it's impossible is the biggest threat out there. Everybody should buy my book. My book is awesome, and I think that's it. Any questions? Sorry, Steve, I know I ignored you. Yeah.
The Ukraine power grid attack 2017,
Yeah.
what was it? Can you give some details behind that?
Russia was able to infiltrate the Ukrainian power grid and screw around with it just like they did in Georgia and everywhere else. I can go, I mean, there's like, I would recommend, I don't know the details. I know it was done, I don't know, I didn't study the specific attack vectors, but they were able to, I gotta step back now, I hate to, but anyway, they're Ukrainian, but they were, Russia essentially, just like they have their fingers in the US power grid, they have their fingers in Ukrainian power grid, and every other power grid around the world, and they screwed around with it just because they don't like them. And they're invading their country too. That didn't stop, you know, that kind of encouragement. Kind of like Georgia too. Any other questions? Sorry, today there's no alcohol in the back, so I mean, it's just like alcohol.
You gotta know somebody.
Oh, okay. But yeah, I guess the party starts in a little while, so have fun. Maybe I'll see you there. Thanks.
Remember, any party is happening.